Hey everyone, it's another episode of Masks Off. This is Tia.
And I'm Kim.
And we are going to be talking about avoidance today. So we're going to call it the avoidance mask. And as always, we start with a quote. So this is from, I should have probably figured out how to say his name. Jiddu Krishnamurti.
Pretty good.
I hope. I should have learned that lesson from a previous episode. In seeking comfort, we generally find a quiet corner in life where there is a minimum of conflict, and then we are afraid to step out of that seclusion. So when I read that quote for the first time, it just made me think of when life gets to be too much. I just want to go find a cozy little spot and just be all alone where no one can bother me. No one can add any more stuff into my world. And I just want to stay in that seclusion spot. But when we stay there too long and avoid any conflict, avoid any overwhelm, then we are... Sorry, I just had a kid come in. Gave me a thumbs up.
We're flowing.
This is what this is.
Yeah.
So I just want to stay there in that comfortable place, but we've talked about how growth happens outside of our comfort zone. And so when we stay too much in avoidance, we get stagnant. And I'm not talking the stagnant of the muck. Like we have the normal growth where we do get stagnant and we get stuck in the muck. And that's processing and active, feeling, active, noticing, just staying there and taking another step out. I'm talking about literally crawling under a blanket and just not wanting to feel, not wanting to think about anything, not wanting to deconstruct. And that can have its purpose and its place. I've done that, made a conscious choice. I just need to not think. I need to not deconstruct. I need to just be a blob for an hour.
Yeah.
Consciously do that and say, okay, time's up. Whether I'm walking back into the muck or walking back into discomfort or whatever that is. But it's like, for me, it's a reset button. But when we are continually putting on that avoidance mask, which many people can do because it gets to be too much. And then we don't come back to it, So it's like, I'm just going to hide and I'm going to pretend the conflict isn't there. And I'm just going to pretend everything's normal again.
Right.
That's unhealthy. And that's going to cause other challenges in your life. And that mask can stay there because we don't want to hurt others. We don't want to disappoint ourselves. So many reasons. And it shows up.
It does. And I think it's even, I don't know what your thoughts are, but I think it's even easier for like the younger generation to fall into that. Not even just younger, I don't want to even say, but in the modern world, now that we have TV
and
we have
little phone.
Yeah, the phone, Facebook, social media, Netflix, Xbox games, video games. It's very easy. It's easier to fall into that trap of avoiding life. Would you agree?
Yes. And I love that you brought that up too, because we've talked about it before, similar, but I don't think we've talked about it the same. It's the numbing.
Yeah.
So what are you using to numb? Numbing is avoidance.
Exactly.
And it's so much easier. When I was a kid, I couldn't numb in the same way that a 12-year-old can numb now, because there were 4 channels on the television and it went off at, it went to the staticky screen, right? In the middle of the night. Or I didn't have a phone to distract myself. I had books, I had nature, I had myself, my own boredom, but there was nothing that could just continually stimulate me with a screen in particular. Because video game, I didn't have any. Our neighbors had one when it was the old Pong game, black and white.
Oh yeah.
Remember
Atari.
that? Atari. Yeah, exactly. But even then, I mean, it
Yeah.
was not something that I never got sucked into that. I know some people did, but I don't think it's the same because it wasn't the same level of stimulation.
I honestly don't know how we did avoid back then, or because I mean, I'm sure the experiences were still there, life was still there, conflict was there, but you're right. I remember just leaving the house early morning and being out all day and not coming home until dark.
I think for me, the avoidance was we just don't talk about it.
Yes.
And we shoved those bad feelings down. We weren't allowed to have the bad feelings, in quote,
Yes.
because they're just feelings. But so the avoidance didn't have the same level of numbing, I think. We just kind of buried it and shoved it down. But we didn't have the ability to distract ourselves in the same way, maybe.
So I would agree. I don't think we had as many tools as we do have now. So going back to the quote then, in seeking comfort, we generally find a quiet corner, quote, in life where there's minimum conflict. And then we are afraid to step out of that seclusion.
Mm-hmm.
So the seclusion can be the numbing parts,
Right.
the distractions, right?
Right. And the seclusion can be that complete full avoidance of our negative feelings, shoving it down. It can be avoiding, like, let's say you're having a challenge with your spouse or your kid or a friend. Yeah. It's like you have that conflict and, we're just never going to talk about it again.
Yeah. Push it
even
under
though
the
it
rug.
will come up again.
Yes.
Down the line in a different way. But I mean, it's okay. We had a challenge, and rather than revisiting and repairing, we just say, we had talked about it enough and now, but we never, when you don't resolve it, not that you can always fully resolve it, but it's that internal resolving it within you and in connection. That makes sense.
I think a lot of it comes to conditioning, right? Cultural conditioning, generational patterns, because we weren't taught when we were young.
Right.
We weren't taught how to deal with conflict or conflict resolution. We were taught conflict avoidance.
Yes, conflict resolution. Exactly.
Like that's literally a skill. It should just be a skill. I keep going back to, honestly, in another lifetime, I think I'm going to come back and I'm going to create and design schools.
That'd be amazing.
And revamp schools because, I mean, honestly, right now is the time because schools aren't working with coronavirus anyway.
Right.
Let's revamp it now, and just our kids, the younger, they need to learn this kind of stuff. Right. That's life school. Like they need more life school than they do. I keep saying this in all the episodes, and it's because I do believe so strongly in it, because I see from my own life where I wasn't taught how to have conflict resolution. I was taught how to avoid conflict, how to avoid those yucky feelings, because I had so many masks on, right? So I wanted to please. I didn't want to disappoint. I didn't want to run the risk of disapproval. I didn't want to run the risk of rejection.
Avoidance, avoidance,
all of that. But yet there's the feeling still in me. Something just happened with this person or in life that made me feel yucky. I have no clue or no skill on how to deal with those feelings.
Right.
So that's what you and I love talking about so much, right? We keep talking about you have to feel to heal.
Right.
And how to go inward. And I know we repeat ourselves all the time in all the episodes because it's so true. It's so important to do that. It's what's made my life change. It's hard.
It's hard. And it's so much easier to go in that little avoidance, like he said in the quote, right? That quiet corner. Yep. Because when we go there, we think we're better. We think because we're not feeling that ickiness or that conflict or whatever is showing up, whatever you're avoiding, whether you're avoiding an interaction with another person, whether you're avoiding a situation at work that you don't want to do, a situation with your kid, or you're even avoiding that basic connection with ourselves. Like you said, you're feeling that icky feeling. So I'm going to go in this corner, even though I think I'm avoiding or being okay, you're really just avoiding yourself. Because ultimately it's yourself that you have to lean into that ickiness, lean into disappointing others, leaning in to whatever is showing up, because it's an inner conflict within us that's manifesting in a conflict with another person, which is all that co-creation in 100% responsibility.
Maybe we can explain that part. Do you want to explain that a little bit more to the listeners, that the inner conflict within us is, or that we think is in the other, is really within us?
Yeah. I mean, it comes back to a lot of the shadow work we kind of touched on a little bit. So when we're projecting onto another, there's always a piece within us. So when we complain about another, when we, and that doesn't mean someone isn't just a jerk, so someone can just be a jerk and completely off the rails. But usually then we're like, oh, they're just being a jerk. And there's no that second arrow. There's no second arrow, right?
Right.
Where when we are noticing something and we have a second arrow, then so that means if you didn't listen to that episode, go back and listen to first arrow, second arrow episode. So if someone shoots an arrow at you, triggers you, causes, you to rise up and have some feeling. And then we add to the feeling of our thoughts and our beliefs and all of that, and we make it worse, then it's that inner conflict.
Yeah.
You don't have the inner conflict if the first arrow is shot and you just let it bounce right off.
Yeah.
But when it sticks and you add another one, that's the inner conflict. So that's a clue to yourself. Okay, I need to go within. But so many people have been taught to avoid. Put that avoidance mask. Everything's fine. How many times have you, I'll just use this very simple example. Growing up, holidays were stressful for whatever reason. I think it was making sure the food is right or this, or just stress. And so the house we would often get together with another family, and the preparing of the morning would be just like, gotta get this done, da, 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 da.
Yeah.
And then we'd get out the door and we'd all come together and everyone would put on the happy face. Like, everything's great. And, and I remember as a kid internally, I'm like, but I don't feel good from 2 hours ago.
What just happened earlier. Yeah.
Now I'm supposed to pretend I feel great. And so there's that inner conflict. It's not, it's kind of what we're talking about, but a little different, but it's a way to show it. It's a great example of the avoidance mask. Like, everything's okay. So the avoidance mask can also be the life's fine, even though I'm literally crumbling inside.
Yeah, that one I can so identify with. And especially like you said about the holidays as well, because my mom and my grandmother would always, being Italian, put out a,
I can imagine
10-course meal. We used to have these really long tables, and there would be food from one end all the way down to the other end, with 20 people around us. And so obviously, and I hate cooking, so I cannot even imagine, the pressure that must have been on to put out all this food to get it cooked and at the right time.
I was going to say, exactly. Timing.
Timing is my worst part of cooking. I suck at timing with cooking. So I get it. And because, my mom would feel, or my grandmother would feel the angst and the pressure from it all, there would be some reactivity and some, my sister
don't touch
and
that.
Right. Yeah. Or, whatever it would be. And my sister and I being young and little, let's say if it's Christmas morning, we just want to play and blah, blah, blah. And, we're in the space, and then all of a sudden there's this yelling or whatever going on, and this, and you're right. And then there's this icky feeling inside of me because there was just a fight, and then all of a sudden everybody shows up and it's like, okay, we just pushed that all underneath the rug. Like, what happened to what happened before? Right. Can we go back and address that, please? Can we work that through?
And I'm never was
crappy, and never was.
Christmas would be over, and then we'd just go to bed and ignore all the stress.
And then year after year, and that would happen on Easter or any other, and the thing is, and it's not about blaming, right? It's not about blaming my mom or my grandma, because everyone does it. Everyone has done it. And talk about the co-creation at the same time, like the perfection piece or whatever was at play, to like, we create that.
So many
create
masks.
the more masks. It's got to be this big dinner. It's got to be perfect. It's all the expectations that were put on the holiday, on the dinner, that who created those expectations, right? My mom did,
right?
My grandmother did, or whoever.
And then it perpetuated.
Now, like, could we have just ordered a turkey from someone? Could we have had McDonald's or pancakes? But like, oh my God, no, you don't have pancakes for dinner on Christmas Day. There's the cultural conditioning. We really do need to move in the cultural conditioning at one point.
I'm writing it down.
Talk about, right?
Yeah.
But honestly, it's like you're good at always bringing it up. You always make the comment of who said that you had to have pasta first, like just sticking with that example. You had to have a lasagna, you had to have a pasta, you had to have a roast beef, you had to have a ham, you had to have 6 vegetables, and then you had to have like all these desserts afterwards. Who said?
Exactly.
Who said? Why can't we just have like, a cozy little just us?
Right.
Stay in our pajamas all day. And I have known a couple of families who will do that. Like maybe Christmas Eve, they might do something big, but on Christmas Day, they just stay in pajamas all day, and they might like order out or order pizza or whatever, and just take the pressure off
and connect
because it's more about connecting than anything. But culture doesn't teach us that. So we go into this other stuff, and then that's why, all the icky stuff comes up, and then the avoidance of what's going on.
And you see all these Christmas movies or whatever,
goodness.
And it's like the big, like you said, that huge spread, everybody's laughing and smiling. And then how many families actually have a holiday like that?
Oh my goodness. Very few.
I can't.
Very few. I mean, honestly, Christmas is like in the 12-step rooms is the time when 12-step rooms are the most crowded.
Really?
Because they are, they're the most crowded because it's when the most stuff comes up for people.
Right.
So because it's like all the conditioning, all the layers, all the masks of every family individual or whatever come up.
Right. So you can't avoid that coming up, but but people still put those masks on to survive and get through those holiday times. And
it's hard. I mean, it's hard to confront, right? It's hard to confront. It's so hard to confront our part in it.
Right.
To admit that, okay, this is my part in this conflict or this issue that we're having. Can you imagine me as a kid, like saying, Mom, you know what? You really don't have to do all this. You're choosing to do this huge spread and put all this pressure on you. And now you're upset and you're taking it out on me or this one or that one. And it's making it icky. Like, who's going to say that? Right. Totally. As a kid.
No, very few.
It's so hard to confront another person because other people become defensive and deny. There's the denial mask. Right. And it's hard for us to own. Look how all our episodes are coming together.
All because of avoidance.
All because of avoidance. They just overlap.
They do.
It's but going back to the quote, in seeking comfort. So if we want to go into our comfort zone to find a quiet corner, there's a minimum of conflict, but then we're afraid to step out. Then it becomes lonely, secluded, disconnected.
Exactly.
That's no way to go through life either.
No. Well, and even just how you said it right there, it makes me think of what's going on right now. I mean, I know there's a lot of people are kind of not as secluded and quarantined as they were back in April and May, but we're coming into winter again.
I know.
And so that there's actually a conversation about, it's easy to get out and get active and meet outside.
Yep.
Proper social distance, but knowing the virus is more intense inside. So what's going to happen in the winter months, in the seclusion? Because we already have seclusion.
Yeah.
I mean, people have gone hundreds of days without getting a hug.
I know.
If you live alone.
Those in nursing homes.
Right. And so there's that disconnection piece. So here we're talking the formless, like we're avoiding and going into that secluded space, whether that's just a space in our mind or whatever, but we're physically seeing it in the world right now as well. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds for people. You know, how are they going to make sure there's connection? How are we going to make sure that we don't get stuck in this little quiet room of avoidance? Because when we're not practicing conflict, when we're not having those experiences of connecting to another, and remembering connection is not always feel good. So we can have a conflict and still have connection.
Right.
And we have to remember that, because it comes back like the Christmas movies. It's the same thing. We have this idea connection is like, oh, when we're hugging and everything is great.
Rainbows and unicorns.
Yeah. There's connection and conflict.
There can be. And for me, it would just look like, okay, even if like you and I were having a conflict and we were still connecting, it's, even if you're upset or I'm upset, I'm still hearing you.
Yes, exactly.
Right? I'm hearing you, and you're hearing me, and I'm seeking to understand you and understand where you're coming from. Doesn't mean that I have to agree with what you're saying or like what you're saying, but I get you. I get it. And that's what we want to know, is just that we get one another.
And we're feeling seen and heard by another, even in conflict. And I think right now in the world we're living in this year in particular, I mean, and it's been building over the years, people can't talk politics. They can't talk anything. If anyone does not have the same belief you have, you're the other. Right? Separation. I mean, how many times have we been told, oh, we just don't talk religion or politics?
Yep.
And that's doing a disservice to our human connection, because it's creating those little isolation rooms of no conflict, and we're avoiding the difficult. I grew up talking politics. We grew up talking all of that. Whether someone agreed or didn't, people listened and tried to understand. It's like, you know what? You don't have to agree and see things my way, but I see you as a human, and I see your perspective, and I can respect that. So there was connection, and it's so divided, and that's that avoidance. Exactly. I think the avoidance mask, I mean, we didn't know we were going to talk about this today. I know, again, another conversation. Yeah. But I think it's really pertinent right now, moving into the election cycle as it's getting ramped up. What is it? Today is August 13th when we're recording this. This will be released in a couple more weeks. So we're going to be even further into the political, quote, nastiness, which is what it has become to. A lot of finger pointing, blaming, name calling. How is that serving humanity? How is that serving connection? And I mean, I think some of it, and we were talking about this before we started recording, is there's a huge, massive energy shift happening. And conflict is part of that. But we need healthy conflict, not unhealthy conflict. And I feel we have a lot of unhealthy conflict of avoidance, not listening, not connecting. It's more, I'm going to lob the bomb across at you, and then I'm going to run and hide when you don't agree, or just keep lobbing these things, but I'm not hearing anything back. And if we can shift that and help, like you said, teach it in the schools, start to bring this, how do we have conflict resolution? How do we listen to one another? The Maria Montessori, my kids went to Montessori school, and one of her things I think it continues through the older years, but in the 3 to 6 year old, the younger, I think they may even have it they have a peace table. And so when two kids have a conflict, they had come to the peace table, and the guide, the teacher, they call them guides, helps them, each child, hear and listen to the other. So rather than, saying time out for you, no, we come together. So rather than avoidance, which is what a timeout is, it's teaching our children, you're bad, you did something wrong, we're going to isolate you, versus, hey, let's do a time in, or a peace table, or whatever you want to call it, and let's just work through this. We don't even have to talk. We can sit at the table with our arms crossed, because we don't know how to use our words, right? Yeah. But we can energetically let that move through, and when you're sitting across from another, you eventually will connect. once you let that guard down and take that avoidance
Yeah,
mask off.
that's a beautiful example. And you're right. If that is just something that was taught, because not only like, let's sit across the table from one another, but again, if both parties are still limbic and they're fired up, right? Because their emotions. So, okay. So
when you say limbic, for people who don't know what that means, explain it, because I mean, we've talked about it before, but just that language that someone may not know what that means.
So just feeling limbic is when one is emotionally in charge. You're not in your thinking brain. You're completely reacting. You're in reactivity and you're emotional.
Yeah. Fight or flight.
Fight or flight. So, and so it takes some time to decompress, which is why the old saying comes, like, just count to 10 so you can just calm down. So I'm just thinking about that example that you gave. If even the two people involved had to sit across from the table and they weren't ready to communicate or have conflict, just to also teach some mindfulness right in that moment. Let's just sit here. Let's breathe until you can both relax, until you can both come back to center, until you calm down. And then now let's have you share what your experience is or what your feelings are. Talk from how you feel rather than from finger blaming, right?
Right. Exactly. Pointing
and avoiding. So yeah, so I think this was, we said at the beginning, we were just going to do a quick video just to lay the groundwork on the avoidance mask and to just talk about it. And then in our next episode, we're going to go a little bit deeper into talking about avoidance and the connection and so on, and how even boundaries get involved with that as well.
There's so many layers. We'll see where our conversation goes, but we're going to continue the avoidance.
Absolutely. So thank you everybody for listening. And as always, we would appreciate your love and support by by liking, sharing, commenting. Keep listening. We would love your support.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.